was an emotional moment for those who came to remember Biko at the cell where he was held in Pretoria. Some said the ideal that Biko stood for, of a non-racial and prosperous country, was a dream deferred.
The euphoria is waning, the Christmas party is over, our people are in trouble now.
We are calling once more for the unity of our people. We are calling once more for a system, an economic system that will be sensitive to the needs of our people.
A cleansing ceremony was also performed and wreaths were laid. Biko was also remembered at his hometown at Ginsburg Township in King Williamstown. Here, a commemorative walk follows Biko's final path from his funeral service to his grave.
It's incredibly important for us as South Africans to learn about Steve Biko because he's actually part of our history.
Tata Biko actually wanted us to be seen as people with no color, as people as a united nation.
Oh, Biko, Biko, because Biko. Oh, Biko, Biko.
And to talk further about the legacy of Steve Biko, with us in studio is Dr. Sats Cooper, who's Biko's friend and fellow activist. A very good evening to you. Thank you for coming in to join us.
It's my pleasure.
If we look at South Africa and where we are now as a nation, are we living out the ideals that Steve Biko stood for and ultimately died for?
Not at all. I think we have moved so far from Biko's legacy, indeed from the legacy of the ANC's Freedom Charter, that the chasm may be too wide to breach in the short term. I think that the sheer scale of rapaciousness, of greed, of taking the majority for granted is shocking, and that's why we're seeing the level of protests that we have been seeing consistently over these last few years.
What do we do to get to that quality of leadership, to that state where we're a mature nation? What do we have to do as a country?
I think we need a few mature, fearless, wise people to stand up and be counted, and to stand up for this country rather than for any partisanship or for any narrow political gains. And we're going to get a lot of this in the next few months as we gear up for the next election. I think we need a generation of older people and younger people to join hands and say this country, as it enters its 20th anniversary of democracy, should not continue the way it is, because there will be no let to the anger that will visit that.
If Steve Biko were alive today, what would he say about the role and the relevance of black consciousness in 2013?
Well, Vibhakshini, you've been on the front line of news, and you've seen the horrors that we commit almost on a daily basis to ourselves and to those close to us. That kind of occurrence would not be there if there was a greater sense of self, a greater understanding of our own identity and humanity, and we acted with respect, first to ourselves and then to others. That's the essential lesson of black consciousness, that nobody is superior, nobody is inferior, we are all human beings, and that we need to restore our humanity to ourselves. Clearly, there are large parts of our country where that humanity is fractured. We are a nation at war with ourselves without it being declared. We lose more people than places that actually have wars. So this intolerable situation cannot just continue. We can make excuses, but I think the will hasn't been there by certain leadership to begin to make the change and to stop the decline into the chaos and terrible conditions that we see unleashed around us all the time.
It's the 36th anniversary of his death. Take us back. Where were you? How did you hear the news?
I was in Robben Island prison, locked up in a single cells isolation block. Dalla Omar was our attorney, and he visited and was only allowed to see Terra Likota. So he gave him the news the next day after it had happened that Steve was killed in detention. And Terra came back and told us, and all of us were stilled by what had happened, because Steve was somebody that was part of us. He was one of the main defense witnesses in our trial, and we really were shocked by that, but we were girded by the fact that there but for the grace of went the rest of us. And so we dedicated ourselves to making sure that those ideals for which he stood, which he led us on, would continue to live.
Now, you were his friend, a former activist. You worked with him in the student organization. What are some of the important lessons you learned from Steve Biko?
Not to be afraid that however terrible, however fearsome, however difficult and depressing the conditions may be, to retain that sense of self, to retain that sense of hope and purposefulness. And Steve, in a very singular way, led us in breaking the cycle of fear by the apartheid secret police. So we were able to create a movement some 9 years after the ANC and PAC were banned. And when everyone said, well, you're going to be in prison, we knew we were going to be in prison, we knew we were going to be banned, we knew we were going to be tortured, but we still decided to do that. And all of us were in our late teens, early 20s. In fact, Steve's writings were in his early 20s till the age of 26 when he was banned. And his legacy lives on. Those writings are real today as if 36 years have not passed.
Thank you very much for your time. That was Dr. Sats Cooper, a former activist and friend of the late Steve Biko. We'll be back with more news after the break. Do stay with us.